Thanks for staying with us. Now let's unpack the economic outlook further with economist Dawie Roodt. Thank you so much for your time, Dawie. We do appreciate it. Let's maybe start off with that announcement by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy with the decrease in petrol, diesel and paraffin. A really welcomed statement from the department, given that it's quite a significant drop.
Yeah, indeed. I think this is indeed very, very good news. As a macroeconomist, of course, my interest will be to see what the impact of this is going to be on inflation. And as we know, inflation has been quite a problem recently. And the Reserve Bank has been increasing interest rates quite a lot in order to keep a lid on inflation. So this is certainly going to assist in getting inflation a little bit lower. And coupled with what economists call a high base during 2022, I think that inflation over the next couple of months can come down quite sharply. And by the middle of the year, with a bit of luck, we can start talking about possible reduction in interest rates. But this certainly is very good news as far as inflation is concerned. But for specific industries, this is also very good news. And I'm thinking, for example, of agriculture. Agriculture is very much dependent on the price of whatever the diesel price is, and a significant fall in the diesel price will certainly assist that specific industry, but other industries as well. Good news.
Yes, certainly. And also, given the seriousness of the constant rolling blackouts that we have been experiencing, many have been relying on diesel to keep their generators going, including Eskom being unable to sustain and keep up with its diesel bill. But you touch on something very important, and you touch on the fact that this could have an impact on inflation. And just seeing what people are saying on social media, many are saying that this drop in price of petrol and diesel is not going to be sustained, and we will most likely be seeing an increase because this is normally what happens. What is your view on that? Do you think that we might see a further drop, or do you think that come the next month we are going to be seeing petrol going up by 3 rand?
I'm pretty sure that we're going to see an increase in the petrol price in March. And the reason why I say so is because the Minister of Finance always increases the fuel levy during its February meeting. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see an increase in taxes on petrol. And just by the way, it's very painful, but a tax on petrol is less damaging to the economy than taxes, say, for example, on company taxes, as an example. So there's one increase that we can expect, and that is because of taxes. But for the rest, it really depends on what's going to happen to the exchange rate of the rand and what's going to happen to international oil prices. Now, the international oil prices, that's a good question, because that will be a function of what is, amongst others, what is going to happen in Ukraine. Will the conflict continue there? How will that impact on the supply of oil, as an example? And what will that impact on the price of oil eventually? My suspicion is that the oil price is likely to gradually drift lower, because I think countries like, for example, Venezuela will start pumping oil as well. So as far as the oil price is concerned, I think the oil price will stay at these levels or gradually drift a little bit lower. Of course, if there's more conflict somewhere else in the world, or maybe in Europe, then the opposite could happen. But for now, I think that's going to happen. As far as the exchange rate of the rand is concerned, but the rand has been behaving not too badly the last couple of weeks. And with a bit of luck, we could see the rand drifting a little bit stronger as well. So not necessarily a further increase in the short term of the petrol price, depending how much the Minister of Finance is going to change the taxes on petrol, of course. But on a slightly medium term, longer term, I'm afraid I'm not too bullish on the rand. I think the rand will eventually come under pressure, and that will, of course, filter through to higher petrol prices. So no, not necessarily an increase around the corner on the petrol price, except for the increase in the taxes that can be expected on petrol.
Yes, I think we're all going to be watching that budget speech in February very closely to see the moves that the finance minister makes there. But you also touch on another important point, and I think it's important for South Africans to understand that a lot of what impacts the petrol price is out of our control. With the Russia and Ukraine conflict, you are finding countries now trying to scramble and find alternatives, because we just do not know when there's going to be any resolution in Ukraine. But I want us to move over to what the year ahead is going to look like, especially when it comes to interest rates. We have not had it easy this year in 2022 when it comes to the interest rates hikes, and many saying that everything is just getting so expensive, and now we're paying more for our interest rates, and is it going to get worse in 2023? What is your outlook on that?
The answer is yes, it is going to get worse. But I think the worst is behind us. I think where the worst as far as inflation is concerned is behind us. Inflation is likely to remain above the target band of the Reserve Bank for the next couple of months. So, but it will gradually start drifting lower based on our assumptions at the moment. Of course, something can always go wrong somewhere, but based on the current trends, I think inflation is likely to drift lower. I believe that the Reserve Bank will continue to increase interest rates. So I expect another increase, another 2 increases by the Reserve Bank over the next, say, 4 months or 5 months or so, but at a smaller margin. So I think this time around they're going to go for 50 basis points and thereafter perhaps at 25 basis points. But then we're pretty much done based on how much we know at the moment. So yes, increases in interest rates can further be expected, but not too much. The worst is behind us, I'm pretty sure of that, unless something really horrible goes wrong somewhere. And like I've said, by the middle of the year, we can start talking about the possibility of slightly lower interest rates. But I must tell you that I think we all have to support the South African Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank started early in the cycle. When it became clear that inflation is going to become a problem, they started increasing interest rates, which is very painful and it's not good for economic growth. But it's much better to have high short-term interest rates than to have inflation high at a longer period of time. That is far more damaging to economic growth in the economy. So the Reserve Bank acted correctly, and it's clear that the Reserve Bank is very much independent and that they forced us to take this very bitter medicine at the right time of the illness called inflation. And because of that, we can start looking forward to inflation falling now pretty much over the next couple of months, and thereafter the Reserve Bank will have space to start cutting interest rates again.
You've basically answered this, but I'm going to ask you in a different way.
Yeah.
For example, my sister was here a couple of weeks ago, and she used to stay in South Africa, and she was walking in the shops, and she said, I can't believe the prices of everything. She says inflation is really bad in South Africa. Everything has gone up. And you hear the complaints of South Africans every single day where they're just saying they're not making ends meet. Everything has gone up. The cost of living has gone up. And are we most likely to see that continuing in 2023, especially when it comes to food prices?
Yeah, well, I've had the visits also from people from abroad the last couple of weeks, and they are all just smiles. They say everything is so cheap. They say meat is so cheap, even alcohol is so cheap. Everything is cheap for them. And the reason why it's cheap for them is because our currency is such a weak currency. The answer to your question basically is that the biggest issue in South Africa is just weak economic growth. And because of weak economic growth, we cannot employ enough people, and poverty becomes a problem, and things like a smallish increase in food prices becomes a huge problem for a lot of people. So that is actually the question. What can we do to improve economic growth in South Africa? And the answer to that is that the answer to economic growth is actually fairly simple and straightforward, and it's easy to get the economy to grow. The problem is politics, as always. And politics is standing in the way mostly of getting things in place to get the South African economy to start growing faster. And I'm afraid politics is not going to, our political problems are not going to be resolved until after the general election, which is going to happen in 18 months' time or around about there. And only then will the financial markets and investors will vote with their feet to say, listen, we like this new government, we like this new policies that they're putting in place or not. So I think for the next a year and a half at least, not much is going to be seen as far as economic activities is seen concerned. And then thereafter, we will have to wait and see what the new government is going to, what policies they're going to implement and whether capital is going to like that or not. So economic growth is actually the biggest problem in the country.